Hey everyone, and welcome back to another devlog for this medieval fantasy game I'm making. A game where the 2D combat from Gladihoppers meets the overworld gameplay from Mountain Blade with the world building of a 6-year-old child sprinkled into the mix. Before I show you some of the new stuff, let's take a quick look back because as of making this video, it's been about a year since I started working on this game.
Yeah, it's rewind time.
The first few months were spent mostly on recreating features from Gladihoppers such as the map movement and interactions from the game mode Spartacus War, as well as the basic fighting mechanics. I tried leaning more heavily into a physics-based type of combat, but I ultimately decided to just go with the traditional Gladihoppers style of fighting. It took me a while to find the right artists to work with and get them started with creating assets for the game. At this time, I was also trying to develop a small strategy game set in the same universe, as well as having a creative writer do some work on world building, since I thought I would have so much more spare time now that I could actually afford to hire people. Turns out organizing and communicating are pretty time and energy consuming things to have to do, so I opted to take things slow, focus on the main project and do the world building myself whenever it was needed. So the following months, I continued working on the fighting mechanics. I kept adding features from Gladihoppers such as throwing weapons, but I also added things that it lacked like female characters, being able to throw melee weapons and the ability to sheath weapons as well. I wanted to flesh out the fight scene as much as possible with smaller details that when combined would improve the game. I wasn't and I'm still not exactly sure how much time the player will be spending in this part of the game as opposed to on the overworld, so I wanted to lay a foundation for more than just combat-focused gameplay. After having worked on the fight scene for a long time, I really wanted to do some world building. I started to define some basic characteristics for the factions and give some pointers for how their equipment and architecture should look like. But obviously all the credit goes to Waterwitch and her team of artists who brought it all to life. They've got a website now, so check it out if you're interested, links in the description. I shifted my attention to the overworld and made a vertical slice in the northwestern part of the map using the tiles created. I'm a big fan of mountains, so I was very adamant about having lots of tiles to properly communicate how cool mountains are, even though in game they're impassable and pretty much functionally useless. We also added fonts to the game and I started to put together a list of locations that could populate the overworld and serve as backdrops for the fight scene, as well as to offer other various gameplay scenarios in the form of mini-games that will break up the monotony of fighting all the time. Then when the art for these new backgrounds started coming in, I did some big brain calculations and figured out the correct numbers for the parallaxing effect that up until this point wasn't looking all that great. In October, I had the idea of updating another game of mine, Soccer is Football, before the World Cup started, but I didn't finish in time and I've since decided to indefinitely delay that update. I was also taking care of our daughter most days, so I didn't really work during these past few months, but fortunately progress was still made as the artist kept adding new assets and updating old ones. For example, the overworld representation of the main city was finalized and the mountains were reworked once again, with more detail and a different palette, and so I'm really happy with how the overworld looks at the moment. So now that a year has passed since the start of development, it's probably a good idea to try to answer the question of what's next and what's left to do. As for the latter, the answer is a lot, more than I can list here, which is why my plan at the moment is to release a bare bones version of the game first, sometime within a year, and then add more features later on in updates. But before I can start working towards that goal, I need to catch up with all the work that the artists have done while I've been away. I'm trying out the feasibility of having long tunics, dresses and cloaks in the game. The sprites are split up into sections and parented to each other in a chain of animated objects. For simple idle animations like this one, there are no real issues, but the more you rotate the legs, the uglier it looks. I've set the right leg's rotation to mirror that of the left leg, and each torso armor that covers the legs will have to contain a parameter that activates this constraint. This should work fine, but I can see how the cloaks in particular could be a problem for when the characters ragdoll. After reading about material property blocks, I've found out that I can change the colors for each instance of my color replace material. This solution is way cleaner than what I was doing before, and it allows me to add more custom colors for the equipment should I wish to do so in the future. Alright, so up until now I've been making changes only to test objects in a test scene, but since it seems like everything works, I'll add 2 new outfits using long tunics and cloaks to see how it actually looks in-game. I'm creating this document where I can cut and edit the equipment more consistently, because one of my biggest fears in life is that something somewhere has a pivot point set incorrectly and that it's not positioned properly onto the character. In the end, it took me quite a while to figure this out, and it's still not perfect since the legs are individual game objects that pivot around a different point than the torso does, so things get a bit too weird at extreme angles, but I think it looks good during actual gameplay.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering
why I said it looks good when it obviously doesn't. Well, the truth is I was in denial. It's now clear to me that this method just doesn't work, and I'm kind of back to square one. I guess I could deform the sprite mesh somehow, but I like to avoid that since it seems to be more complicated. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of disheartening, so I'll wait with adding the rest of the equipment and hope that a solution comes to me in my sleep or something. Or in a comment to this video. Now instead, I want to make a web demo of a small menu where you can see the units and how they currently look in game. I did the same thing with the overworld map, and it's pretty useful for showing the artists and other people who don't have access to the Unity project how things are looking. I also took this opportunity to tweak the item system, and it's now using names as IDs. So it's a lot easier for me to make changes to inventories. The ID is automatically named after the scriptable object as well, so it's all working very smoothly. So the unit viewer shows a base human and fawn and the 4 major factions equipment. Because of the equipment issue that I just mentioned, there's not much to see here at the moment, but I can easily add new outfits to this menu once I've sorted that out. Now, as for the overworld, it's also far from finished obviously, but it's not really a priority right now, because as I hinted at before, I want to focus on the battle scene, or rather the action scene, since it will be used for more than just combat. I might just start calling it the Actionworld so it fits better with the overworld as a name. The last thing I'll do is to reorganize and import all of the background sprites, because in the next video I'm gonna start working on an editor for creating custom backgrounds for the Actionworld. The current plan is to finish this Actionworld editor, the rest of the combat mechanics needed to have a simple quick fight mode, as well as a fully functioning character customizer, and then release those parts of the game as some sort of early access / beta version. This should hopefully be done in time for summer, but stick around for the next devlogs to find out how bad I am with deadlines and how I'll probably change my plans several times over in the months to come. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.